Welcome to the Absolute Dog Sexier and Squirrel podcast. I'm Lauren Langman. I'm one of the world's leading dog trainers, and it's my mission to help owners become their dog's top priority. In each episode, you'll discover how to gain trust and communicate with your dog like never before, creating unbreakable bonds that make you the most exciting part of their world.
Hello and welcome to the Sexier and Squirrel podcast that gives you real life results, even when you're doing a podcast in a hat. Now, why am I in a hat? The reason I'm in a hat is it's blooming freezing, and I decided if I take my hat off, I've got hat hair, and I'm still a little bit cold too. So you know what, we've been training a lot today, haven't we? We've actually had a really good day. Linda, it's been a long day, yeah. And we were talking, and I think this is so interesting. We're talking today, what makes people compete with dogs? Like, why do people compete with dogs? Like, what is this whole crazy thing about? Because I've been a competitor with dogs now for 25 years. That scares me a little because I actually can't believe that's a quarter of a century I've been competing with dogs. And I remember the first time I ever went to a competition with a dog, Linda, that I jumped more jumps than my dog did. I had no idea of the competition I was going into. I really didn't have a clue. And I would say now I'm a very competent competitor. I know exactly what I'm going into. I'm pretty strategic. I'm good at planning. I'm good at flexing. I'm good at reading the dog. Like, I know I'm a good competitor now. I'm a lot better than I was 25 years ago, or at least I hope I am. And I also know that I'm completely and utterly addicted. Like, it's a huge addiction. Like, it stops me doing lots of things, from thinking about moving to Australia. Like, I love the idea of Australia, but I would never move there because I love the competition I have in the UK. Mm-hmm. It really does change your whole life when you have a competitive sport like we do. So as a psychotherapist, as somebody who's got huge understanding of people and how we think and why we think and what we do, and as this is an area that I know you've looked into, what's this all about?
What's it all about? Well, for you, I think you are innately competitive. So and you've just described a sort of 0 to 100 mile an hour experience. Like, the first time you went in, you weren't particularly good. You jumped more jumps than your dog, and now you're the lean, mean killing machine when you walk into an agility ring. So that's a big gap. Many people are somewhere in between. There's two types of people, really. There's people who are innately competitive. Now, that comes from all sorts of situations. You can be genetically just, that's the way you are. You could be brought up in a family, the ones that play all the board games, or you grew up with 3 brothers, so you had to compete for everything. Whatever it is, there could be a family that's very competitive.
And I've got a really quick thought on that.
Yes.
And I think my parents never had time for board games because my parents were both very, very, very hardworking. I think lots of people have got sort of various different histories. My history was my parents were very, very, very working class. Dad was a carpenter electrician. Mum worked a million jobs. So actually, we didn't have anything. And I think we had nothing. So I think having nothing, you had to fight for anything you wanted.
But that's what they modelled for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
They modelled that drive.
And then at 11, I did the same. As soon as I could have a job, because we couldn't have a lot, I wanted to work hard. And I wanted to work hard so we could have more, because I could see how important it was. And I would always try and contribute, and I would always try and build and earn. So I'm listening and I'm thinking, I never thought about it, but I wonder if that's where that came from, because I always wanted to hustle to try and help the family mission.
Yeah, so that will have contributed to your drive and your desire to better yourself, to win, to create whatever, a better life for you and your family. So then there's also people get some satisfaction from being seen to have achieved things. So that's sort of self-confidence or self-belief, or some sort of reward for themselves. But a lot of people don't have very strong competitive because they may be too, what we call, agreeable. And that's actually, I don't know whether you ever did psychometric testing in any of your jobs or career, but where you have to fill in this long questionnaire and they rate you.
I'm trying to think of one that we've done a lot of. We've done one, it's a Tony Robbins one, actually. I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you test and it tells you what personality type and how you're gonna
all of that. Well,
I enjoyed those.
In the five groups in the personality types, agreeableness and neuroticism are the two that contribute most to being competitive.
Crazy. And you would guess neuroticism, actually. I can see it now.
You can see why.
Can't you? The agreeableism I didn't think about.
Because if you are at the far end of disagreeableness, then you're quite aggressive, you're quite pushy, you're quite argumentative, all of that sort of stuff. Whereas the other end of agreeableness, so if you've got a higher agreeableness score, then you're too agreeable and you're too like
passive almost.
Passive. But if you've got a low agreeable score, then you're going to be much more aggressive, much more argumentative.
So which one of those would be competitive?
The low.
Yeah, because I'm saying I'm definitely more towards that space. I'm like, yeah, I would challenge something, or I would try and like push something.
That's the personality trait that plays into competitiveness. And then neuroticism you agree about. So, but that's a seesaw.
Oh, well, I see it. And I suppose some of the people I think are the best in the sport that I compete in, they're borderline nuts with it. Like it's done to a degree that I think, wow, that's extreme. And I'm thinking of two competitors in particular. I'm not going to mention names, but I'm thinking two competitors that they take it to a level that I can't even think about. Like it's too crazy for me. It's like their level of record keeping, for example, is nuts. For me, it's so extreme. And I can really feel that neuroticism, which I've never thought about before. So it's such an interesting word to put here, because it almost is borderline nuts.
It is. But it has, like all of these things, it's a seesaw. So it'll have a positive side and a downside. So if you're too neurotic in terms of sensitivity, then you won't be particularly competitive, because you don't want to be shown up. You don't want to, you find it too stressful. You might be, overwhelmed by anxiety, all of that sort of thing. So there's always a plus and a minus side to it all. But they're the two personality traits that play mostly into competitiveness. But then there's this dog sport side, because very often what happens is people get a dog and they want to do something with the dog. They've never done a dog sport. They get their dog and they want to teach the dog to behave itself. They go to a club or they go to a group or something, and they find that they quite enjoy the relationship with the dog, the doing something with the dog, and then they get into a dog sport. And then they're getting positive feedback for being competent at learning a skill. So they're feeling good about learning a skill, their dog's learning, this is all lovely. But the dog sport is then, there's an opportunity to compete. And then some people can get into quite a dilemma about that. I didn't get into this to compete. And others are, well, I want to compete because I want to measure myself against everybody else who's doing this dog sport. But I find it really hard. I get very anxious, or I fall to pieces, or I make mistakes in the ring, or all of these things come up. And there's a switch from, there's an innate motivation for training a dog. You're learning a skill. So you're it's a self-rewarding thing. You feel good about yourself. You're being a better dog trainer. The dog's learning. It's all lovely. But then there's the external reward. Do we want the prizes? Do we want the red ribbon? Do we really want that? So then we go from an innate motivation to an external motivation. So the motivation is now the prize. So then it switches, and that's where a lot of people struggle in a dog sport, because owning a dog usually is about affiliation. It's about relationship. And then when we say, oh, we're going to compete, then suddenly it's not about relationship anymore. It's about me against everybody else.
Which is such a different space. Now I'm thinking about this, and actually, I say so often, I'm really not interested in rosettes. Like the rosettes do not interest me at all, but I'm so interested in qualification. Qualification is like a massive driver. And when I think about it, it's a level of gamification. So that gamification, whereas I say like I'm not interested in Tetris or Nintendos or different types of like gamification of other things. But actually, when I think about it, I really am, because the gamification of my dog sport, I'm very interested in. I'm all in. And whether that's qualifying for crafts, whether it's qualifying for Olympia, whether it's qualifying for any big event, really, I love the gamification. So I really love the gamification. And I love the qualification. So that's, again, another extrinsic or external, but a different external to the rosette form. Like I could throw the rosette in the bin. Like I'm not interested, other than I quite like a photo. But again, that's like a public perception thing, I imagine, and a level of, as much as I don't think I'm an ego-driven person, I think there's a level of ego that's in there.
There is a level
as much as I don't necessarily always want to acknowledge that.
But there's always in somebody, there's always that to some extent. And to be able to say, yes, it is ego-driven. I mean, I compete in obedience. Every dog I get, in my mind, is going to be a championship level dog. And that's where I go. And I can get, I have to be careful not to be sniffy about the lower classes. But that's my mindset, and that's my ego. I am a championship handler. That's what I do. And that's ego. That's me getting some positive reinforcement and feeling good about myself. It builds my self-esteem. But there's nothing wrong with these things as long as we're aware of them and we acknowledge them, and that we don't become the competitor that stomps out the ring because they didn't win.
It's such a brilliant topic, and I really love this topic because I've had a few life-changing events, I suppose, that have changed me from being that competitor, and I was that competitor. So if you picked me up 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I was definitely the competitor that could stomp out the ring in a grump. I was definitely the competitor that could go home and Matt and I would have a really horrible journey home because we just wouldn't talk. And I would be in such a grump. Not disappointed in yourself when you've done it wrong, or disappointed that your dog hasn't necessarily got the skill you thought they had, or disappointed that your training hasn't held up, or disappointed that the judge's course wasn't the course for you, or disappointed that you drove all that way, it wasn't necessarily worth it. And the event that changed my life, I think, with competitive dog sports was losing Matt's dog. And we lost him in a really tragic car accident. And he was 4, he was championship. Matt's hopes and dreams for dogs, and hopes and dreams for competing, and hopes and dreams for all the energy he put in. Like he'd done a great job. And he was not only his first ever like bred dog for agility, so we bought him for agility, he was also a really talented dog. And so that minute of losing him, you know what, it gave me a huge realization of what it was all about. And actually, I didn't really care so much about the dog sport. I cared that we'd lost our friend, and I cared that I almost felt like I wish I'd done more just having him as our friend and thinking about his future in dog sports. And we always thought about how much he was going to win or how much he was going to do, but you actually got that moment taken away from you, and he went too soon. And I think that moment, well, I know that moment changed my perception of dog sports, like innately, like done, finished. Like I loved my dog sport, but I love my dog more. And I love the experience of it. And then I also, every time I sat on the start line with a dog, I'd always think to myself, you never know when this is your last time. And you don't know what's going to change. And because you never think you're going to lose a 4-year-old dog. And I've lost 3. I feel like I lost my Tokyo at 4, and Brave had her accident at 4. I didn't lose her, but you kind of lose a lot of what your hopes are. And we lost Riot at 4. And so for me, you never know when your last opportunity is. And so I think it's just changed my perception on the gratitude I feel for being able to compete in a dog sport, and the gratitude I feel for being able to have my best friend and I in that like privileged position, because it's a really privileged position to stand there with your dog, and to stand there with a dog who wants to work with you and wants to showcase with you, and because they don't opt in for this.
No,
it's us that opt in for this. And so I actually feel very humbled by my dogs, and it's a different feeling to what I used to feel. So I don't know. I was that competitor that was grumpy,
right,
and I'm not anymore. And I genuinely,
well done for changing that.
And I don't have any, if I go wrong, I'm able to laugh. It not always instantly, give me 20 seconds. Sometimes it will take me a second or a coffee. Sometimes it'll take me a pizza. Sometimes there's some level of gratification with food. But I can always turn it around, and I can always see the good side in it. And the only time I struggle, is if a dog is injured. If a dog's injured in the ring, so comes out lame because we're doing a fast dog sport, then I find that a little bit harder. I'm not grumpy, I'm just disappointed that my dog's injured, and I don't like that. But I think that on the whole, I can normally come out smiling. And I smile when I go wrong, and I smile when I go right, and I find the whole experience enjoyable. So that's a growth area, right?
Absolutely, a real growth area. That's really making great strides toward being more balanced about what you do. Because you're right, we don't ask these dogs to do this for us. Whatever it is, we do with them. And the other thing that I work on with my dog, because in obedience, we're so close to each other, and so have to be so in tune with each other.
You're in each other's space the whole time, aren't you?
All the time. That I do a lot of work in getting my mindset right for the dog before I compete. So that's doing everything in the lead up to going into the ring that gets me and the dog into the right space. And in training, making that absolute strong connection with the dog at an emotional level, because they are sentient beings and they have feelings too. And if they are, if they're tuned to us and we're tuned to them, then the relationship and the competitive relationship is much more fruitful.
And that, what you say there is really big as well, because again, I can relate this back to Riot. I owned Riot's sister. She was called Tiki, and Tiki lived to a ripe old age of 16, 17. She lived a very good age to a very good age. And when we lost Riot, I'd always compared Riot and Tiki wasn't as good as Riot. She wasn't as mentally strong. She wasn't as physically strong. She wasn't as well built. She didn't have the same heart. She was just different. She was a softer dog, much softer dog. And when we lost Riot, it allowed me to see her. And as soon as I started to see her, because she was always not as good, and suddenly I was grateful that she was with us because he wasn't. And suddenly the pressure had dropped as well, because I realized that just the privilege of him or her was more important than the competition. I think she went on to win 6 championships. And at the time, I didn't know she'd ever compete because she was so nervous and she was so sensitive. And she won 6 championships and went to Crufts, went to Olympia, went to all the big events. And she had to jump way over a height because our rules were different then. And it's incredible to think that that's what changed it. And you're right, they're so emotionally connected. And because I permanently told myself and her that we weren't good enough, she wasn't good enough. And I wasn't happy with her. And she felt that, and she knew that, and she knew she wasn't good enough for me, and I knew she wasn't what I wanted at the time. And suddenly when I changed the whole perception of the whole scenario and appreciated her for who she was and stopped trying to make her who she wasn't and stopped trying to force a square peg round hole situation. And it's hard to admit that to yourself when you've actually just not been a good dog trainer for that dog. And I'd never ever been unkind to her.
No,
I was kind to her in training, but actually I was unkind in the sense I was trying to force her to be something she wasn't. And when you look back on that and you think to yourself, like, I'm grateful for all the lessons she gave me, and most of all, what good can come out of something so awful, that was it. For me, the ability to see the dog for who she is and not who she isn't.
Well, I've got 2 completely different dogs at the moment.
You couldn't have more opposite. Like, if you could combine those 2,
yes,
there is really the perfect dog. But actually, they are the perfect dog in their own ways.
They're the 2 ends of the spectrum. And the dilemma I get into, and I have to work out really hard, is I prefer one to the other. And the one that frustrates me, I have to pay extra attention to connect with her. So at home, to connect with her, to have time with her, because it's very easy to push her aside and be with the one that I like best.
And that's hard to admit sometimes, isn't it? And I think I like that both of us at the stage of our careers in dogs and life, really, that actually there's been enough life experience that we don't have to try and pretend.
No.
There's enough life experience that you can just be real and say, you know what, I find you easier to connect to than you. So I actually have to acknowledge this. Now, I can hear a dog barking downstairs. They've got a training class going on right now. They've got quite a naughty but nice reactive dog who I know is difficult in the group, and they're working with her and the owner. And I bet that that's hard for that owner to connect with that dog right now. I bet that's hard for that owner to connect with that dog at any time, actually, sometimes. I think it's a hard dog to connect with. And the interesting point here is, I think, for everybody, that it's finding something that you can connect with. So what helps you to connect with the dog that you find harder to connect to?
It's really important for me to spend time sitting with her and actually connecting with her. So even when I'm on a training session, I will just sit down on the grass with her, and it's just her and me, and try to really make that real valuable emotional connection. And the more I build that, the more I can hold on to that when she's doing things I don't like. So when she's noisy, she's stressy, I can still hold on to the real her, the essence that is her. That it is a beautiful, lovable dog who, just wants to work, really.
And she so wants to please. It's just the excitement and the arousal that kicks in, isn't it? And I think that that's something that's really good to acknowledge, that there is finding something good, because when it gets tough. I remember when someone told me how to pick a puppy, and they said, always pick the puppy that you naturally are drawn to, because when it gets really tough, there's something that drew you there, and you'll find them easier to forgive.
You've got to like them.
Yeah. And it is, and I think it's different having I mean, you tell us, I mean, this is definitely your driven session here, because this is an expert area for you, but there's something that makes it very addictive, what we do, right? Something makes it very, very addictive, and we want to keep going. Like, what's that about? Like, it's so addictive.
Well, success is addictive. So it's a bit like when we reward our dogs. We find it rewarding to achieve things, to feel good about ourselves because we've mastered a task.
But sometimes there is no success, or there's a lack of success for a while. Like, how does that work? And I think I know, but I want to check with you.
Well, that's where grit comes in you as a human being. Because I mean, I got drawn into my sport just because I had an absolutely brilliant dog. I wanted to do agility. I never got to do agility. Because
Ulla's going to be mine.
I went to an obedience club and never left, and went to the top in obedience, and here I am. So that's but that being in the club and being part of that community and doing something I enjoy, something I'm passionate about, because I love dogs.
What about the people that don't win? So what about the people that don't win? Because there are enough people in sport that don't win.
They get a lot out of the community.
Yeah.
They get a lot out of the sense of supporting each other. They get a lot out of their relationship with their dog. So there's this thing about, you always take the best dog home. There's a bit of me that goes, really?
Sometimes I look at other dogs and think I'd quite like to take that one home.
Yes, I'd quite like that one that won the ticket to go to Crufts.
Wouldn't that be great? Yep. Pop him in the car.
Just hand it over.
In he goes, spare cage.
But it's that connection to the dog. So you go into a dog sport because you love dogs. There's never anybody in a dog sport who doesn't love their dogs.
No.
Seriously. I mean, there may be people who own dogs that don't love them just as pets, but certainly if they're in a dog sport, then they love their dogs.
I couldn't think any more highly of the dogs I'm working with, because you have a different relationship on every level, don't you? The relationship is very, very special. So what I'm thinking then is, how about, and again, you probably know more about this than I do, when you've had a series of not winning, like, what keeps people in it? Series of not winning.
Well, I've had 5 years since before lockdown. I've been sidelined.
Yeah.
I've been bringing on young dogs, and it hasn't always worked out.
Yeah.
I keep going because A, I love my dogs, and B, I want to be that championship handler again. I want to bring out the potential that I see in the dogs that I've got. And that's going to be the feedback I'll get, the positive feedback I get when I can realise that potential. Because certainly Ulla's got a huge amount of potential.
Amazing potential. And interesting that I think mental game is going to be really important for you and her. And what I see for you and her is you're going to need to be really robust for her and not read in too much into her. You're actually going to have to chill on it.
My challenge is not getting disappointed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'm a bit of a perfectionist.
Yeah.
Then when things are not going along to plan, then it's very easy for me to be disappointed. And the dogs pick up on that.
Oh,
they know.
And she'll pick up quicker than any dog. Like, she's very emotionally intelligent dog. She reads, she'd be a brilliant sheepdog because she reads quick. And if you think that the dogs we're working were bred to look after the sheep, in the sense that they would read anything from a distance and anything from a group of, 1,000 ewes, and they could see one that was lame to be able to siphon it off. Amazing work.
I had an experience when I was with my trainer. We do sendaways, which is where the dog goes from us to a mark in the distance. I was doing sendaways, and when we're training, I do a thing we call loading, which is between the legs, and it's a bit like a greyhound.
Yeah, so like a restraint.
Out of the restraint.
Yeah, driver.
So I'm restraining and winding up, and I have to bend over to do this. And so I let her go, and I stood up, and she stopped halfway and looked around at me. And my trainer said to me, "But you moved." And I went, I didn't move. Thinking I didn't move my feet.
But you actually just moved your body.
I just moved my body, and she knew
immediately.
Although she was going away from me.
Yeah, so she wasn't looking, but she still felt the energy.
Yes.
And I remember being very young. I got Bella when I was 14 or 15. I was young. And I remember Bella was my first border collie. And I remember sitting in a vehicle, we're having fish and chips, Yelverton Moors near the Big Rock. And I remember watching these sheep suddenly moving from one spot to another. And there she was in the car, laser targeting them and moving them with her eyes. Like, they're impactful, those dogs that are emotionally intelligent or energetically intelligent. And I truly believe that. Now, thinking about dog sports and why people do it, how people do it, the reasons they do it, the people around them that do it. What else can you tell us, Linda?
Well, I've been in a group this week here, having a lovely time with people who've come from all over the world because they love dogs, and they also love absolute dogs. And they, just watching them, their faces light up, the delight in the group, the celebrations that have gone on in the group when people have achieved things with their dogs. And that joy is what keeps people
infectious.
It is.
Now, what you say there is so true and so valuable and so what I love about dog sports. But often at the top of dog sports, some of that is lacking. What's that about? So at the top of dog
what I call unhealthy competitiveness comes in. So there are people who want to win at all costs. There are people who are who do what really human beings do in all walks of life and in all areas, which is become tribal, become cliquey. Then so there's the ins and the outs, there's the them and the us. They form alliances, which it used to be my village against your village.
Yeah.
You see that, so we get the alliances formed. So it's us against them, and all that starts to come in at the top end of the sport because the stakes are higher, so much higher.
It's like almost like an elitism that's at that space. And I love my dog sport. And at the same time, there's parts of it that I think I don't want to associate with that at all. Like, that's so not what I want to associate with. It feels very much like a childhood gang or a childhood like
playground
group of kids. And I sometimes listen or think that is so not where my headspace is. And I feel like in one part of my life I'm a grown up, and in another part I'm like, I do feel like I'm in a playground.
Well, I'm being a very sensitive soul, I've struggled hugely with that recently and felt really sort of on the outside. And I've had to really work on focusing on why I'm doing it and what I'm going to do to achieve what I want, regardless of all the peripheral nonsense that goes on. And that's about being confident in myself and walking my own path and staying away from that negative energy.
Yeah, being in your own lane. I've got an example of that negative energy. I took a dog to Olympia about 9 years ago, and a friend of mine, or a person that I knew, not so much a friend, but someone I knew, an acquaintance, she had a sibling of my dog. And I remember her saying, and I remember Matt saying to me, do not, whatever you do, buy into that. Like, don't buy into that, because you'll have lots of negative things to say. And she was just, all she could do is keep saying negative things about the dog, negative things about the course, negative things. And Matt actually got hold of me and moved me. He was like, do not stand there, get over somewhere else, because that is infectious. Anyway, I won that round, and I won the afternoon round, and I won the overall day. Probably one of the highlights of my life to win overall. I've had a few of those opportunities, which has been great. Classic's done the same for me. So has Blink multi times, which is really lovely to have those big winning experiences. They're quite special experiences. But what I would definitely say, and I really appreciate this, is the effect of negative energy around you, because it's big, isn't it?
It is big. It is big, and it's real. We can sort of say, oh no, everybody's in it to be friendly, and there is friendliness at some level, but there is a lot of negative energy, and that gets expressed the nearer the top you get.
And what do you think that's about? Like, there seem to be some people in there that seem to attract more of it, or seem to want to be part of it, or seem to create it, or I'm not sure what that's about. Like, what's that about dog sports, competitiveness? Like, where is all that from? Because that's the part I would prefer not to have.
You have people come in that have that innate tendency to be over competitive, and certainly there are people in obedience who want to win everything and win all the subsidiary prizes that might be going and clear up for the weekend. And I'm sure that they, because you don't need to win everything to qualify. In my world, I qualify and I move on.
Oh, me too. I qualify and then I get myself a Prosecco.
Yes.
I grab some cheese, maybe some champagne, and we go home.
I don't need any more red
Agreed.
cards to decorate
prove it.
my downstairs toilet with. Thank you very much.
Toilet paper.
Yes. I don't need any more, but there are people who do.
Yeah.
There are people who clean up. That creates negative energy around for them with other people.
Yeah.
So then you get a division starting. But the prize becomes more important. The prize of the championship, the prize of going to Crufts or whatever the prize is, becomes so important that people start to behave in ways that are not very attractive. And then also in obedience particularly, we have the style issue. So that's the way dogs are trained.
That's a hard one as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's so it's open to it. It is subjective.
Yes, yeah. And they're just are different ways that people choose to train dogs and different styles in which dogs work. And that's fine, let everybody do their own thing, is what I say. But I know who might like my dog and who might not like my dog.
Because of the style.
Because of the style.
And so I suppose as a bit of a roundup here, Linda, because I think we could probably talk mental game and why people compete for a long, long time. But would you have any tips for people who are in competitive dog sports going forwards? Healthy things that maybe they can either do or think about or know, or just even have the awareness of going forwards?
So number one is prioritize your dog. So build the relationship with your dog. And when you go to a show or go to compete, it's about you and your dog, not about you and anybody else. So that's number one. Secondly, get your own headspace right. So don't worry about what other people are doing, thinking. When you go in the ring, this is the one thing that you get in obedience a lot. Oh, people might be watching me. Actually, people are not watching you because they're all more interested in their own world than they are in yours. You're in the ring for 3 minutes. Who's going to be bothered? Not many people. So just don't worry about what other people are thinking, because they're usually thinking about what they're going to have for their lunch.
And I love the idea of control the controllable. You just can't. Yeah. You can't actually change what they're thinking anyway, no. Even if you wanted to, right? Like it's almost like you frustrate yourself.
Yeah, and you just wind yourself up and make yourself more anxious. Just don't worry about it. And then the other one with obedience that I stress with people a lot is whatever happens in the ring, you are the judge of whether that was good, bad, or indifferent, not the judge. Because unlike agility, where you've either won it or not won it or whatever, or you've knocked a pole down or you haven't, there is a subjective element to obedience, which means that the judge will score you. And that might not be the score that you would have liked to have given yourself.
Oh, I'd definitely be giving myself 10 out of 10.
That's right. But so you go in and you are pleased with what your dog's achieved. And if the dog has achieved and delivered on the way they've been trained and against how you've trained them, then be pleased with that, regardless of where you come.
I think it's brilliant. And I have one to add here, which I think you'll like. And I've won at Crufts, and I've had what I would call a slightly dodgy call on a seesaw. And I felt, oh, I got away with that one. It was high. It wasn't probably my criteria. She pushed me. I went with what she gave me, because you're in the middle of Crufts, you can't stop her and put her back. And the judge didn't mark me. So you go with what you get. Like you go with it. That's what you were given. And that's the hand you were dealt. And I think a lot of people would really be hard on themselves after that. And I feel that whether you win or you lose, you win some, you lose some. Like I've lost when I felt I've got the criteria and the judge hasn't seen it. And that's our subjective element. You're going against a human, not a robot. And I've won when I thought maybe I should have been called on something. Even at the biggest height, like biggest arena, I've lost in the biggest arenas and I've won in the biggest arenas. And I really believe you win some, you lose some.
You do. And
I feel like you have to have a good attitude to that. And I feel like the more you try and get angry, upset, disappointed, or hold on to it, that's not very healthy. No, and so actually being able to, I suppose, let it go, and being able to realize that's just part of being in a dog sport or a competitive sport where you can't control those things. Those things you can't.
Yeah. So I mean, I've had situations where I've done what I thought was a stonking round with my young dog. I don't look at the scores always, because we do scent later on, and I don't want to give the dog any anxiety about scent because I'm leading the class or anything. So I don't look. I went back and I did scent, and I thought, he's done really well here. He was in the novice class, and I went to the scoreboard and to have a look at my score. And I was nowhere near any rosette whatsoever. And it was like, oh, okay then.
Didn't quite read that one. It's so interesting, isn't it? Isn't it interesting, really? Isn't that fascinating? I mean, the thing for us is that ultimately we're privileged. We love our dogs.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine doing anything more fun. And Matt often says to me, you're so lucky you've got such passion for it. Like you've got passion, you've got something you're really passionate about. He's like, I wish I had something I was that passionate about. And I think that is something, high five. Very, very lucky because it gets you out of bed in the morning.
Well,
right?
I had lost my mojo. I mean, in competing, I'd really lost my mojo. And it's only in the last year that I've just got it back again. And now we're on track.
On target, on target. So with that in mind, some of my goals I'm going to share, because the more I share them, the more I know I can help to realise them. So some of my goals, I have got Wild at Crufts. She is a novice dog at Crufts. Wild is different to Skittle. I naturally find myself more drawn to a dog like Skittle, who's very, very able and very, very talented. With Wild, you have to work it differently. She's not as easy to sort of have working, and she's not physically as capable either. And I find that quite hard when a dog, some dogs are more physically capable than others. Ulla versus Sensi and Wild versus Skittle, and Skittle being the more of the capable one, really. But I feel like we can go clear in that environment. I can't control what the other dogs do, but I want to go clear in that environment. So she's qualified for Crufts. She's going to Crufts in March. I think that's quite exciting, and let's see what she's got, really. And then Skittle, I can't wait to qualify her for Crufts, qualify her for Olympia, which I think will be a brilliant environment for her because it's a big open course environment. She's a fast little snake. And then get her to Crufts in 2026 because she can go in the novice in 2026 and then championship in 2027. So I think we'll be drinking champagne is my goal. Linda, what are your goals?
Okay, so I've always been very reluctant to set goals, but I have now. So Ulla, who's the one with the potential,
Huge potential.
She hasn't even competed yet. She hasn't even been entered. So she'll start in novice. But my goal is she'll be at Crufts in 2027.
Yes.
High five.
You're going to get there in 2027. And we know that that is still a push.
It is a push.
Because there's a lot for an obedience dog to do to be able to get there. And it's not like you're going in a baby dog class, you're going in at championship level. And how about Sensi? What sort of goals have you got for her?
At the moment, my goal is to get her into the ring at the start of this season, and for her to complete a round without making any noise.
Brilliant.
That's
Brilliant.
it.
So to complete, so something, so for, and again, different dogs, different
quite
horses.
extreme.
For horses, for her, actually, the easier the round, or the round that doesn't wind her so much, is a better round.
Yeah.
You don't want to give her a round where she gets frustrated.
No.
Whereas with Ulla, we need to challenge her enough and not overface her, and at the same time, put her in a position where she can get to where we need to get her to, and keep her confident. So I think it's really exciting. I think it's really, really exciting.
Yes.
Ready.
Exciting times ahead.
Oh, it is, and it's lovely. It gives purpose. It gives
does.
huge purpose. And the other thing, know that even when we set goals, actually sometimes we might need to reassess and check in. And I know that you've got the arena here, you've got all of our support, and we're definitely behind you. So I'm excited. I'm excited. Both all girls at Crufts. So this episode, we've covered a lot. We've covered some mindset. We've covered why we compete and what even that genetic makeup might be, or where did that even come from. And I certainly think mine came from probably a little bit of hardship and maybe a little bit of struggle and a little bit of wanting something that we didn't have.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing is that there's lots we can control around mindset. There's lots we can control around competitiveness. And there's certainly people we might want to align with, and there's certainly people we might not want to align with, and actually we can control that, right, Linda?
Absolutely right.
I'm excited. I'm excited for the future. Thank you so much for joining me. That was this episode of the Sexier and Squirrel podcast. I hope you join me for the next episode. And remember, stay sexy.